Testing. Okay, bet it up. All right, so what we gonna do here? We're gonna run through the connection, real deep, sinister connection between Andrew Jackson, Lewis Cass, Big Sean, Cass Tech, and the city of Royal Oak, Michigan, and how I ended up coming around. Coming around to a really interesting and ongoing like veneration type connection stemming from the subjugation of the indigenous peoples and the ideologies that perpetrated or perpetuated that action, and then how it ends up getting to be something that is reinforced by someone in the modern day. So then we can kind of bridge these different time gaps, so then it kind of brings more of a long, big sort of what you would call broader perspective, bird's eye view, big picture connectivity on the whole pieces of the puzzle to how we end up in this kind of predicaments that we end up in. So we got Lewis Cass, Andrew Jackson, Cass Tech High School, the indigenous peoples, which end up being misnomered as African Americans and then represented in the public domain, in this case by Big Sean. And then you have those who are the puppet masters behind all of this, the Holy Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuit order. And then you have what predated the incorporation of Royal Oak, which would be initially really the Doctrine of Discovery. The 7 Years' War is a pivotal situation, but then what comes after that would be what we know as falsified treaties due to like 1791, 1793 Trade and Intercourse Acts, how they interact with each other. Mainly the 1791 edition granting presidents that time, and then moving forward the ability to appoint so-called tribal leaders of so-called Indian nations to be able to negotiate treaties so that cedings of lands could take place. So those of us who are familiar with the actual indigenous culture know that that could never happen. So thus nullifying and falsifying every treaty on its face, and then also considering that everything is non-performative. There's been non-performance on every single agreement. So by default, everything that was ever so-called agreed upon was never obviously agreed upon because it never took place. On the right here, you can notice the timeline of everything that up until as far as the big events are very noteworthy. Just a little brush up on the backgrounds to have more context of these places as far as where these ideas are coming from to influence the so-called senators, legislators, House of Representatives, state secretaries, etc., etc. British Crown borrowed heavily from the British and Dutch bankers to bankroll the war, doubling the British national debt. King George II argued that since French and Indian War benefited the colonists by securing their borders, they should contribute to paying down the war debt. To defend his newly won territory from future attacks, King George II also decided to install permanent British Army units in the Americas, which required additional sources of revenue. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act to help pay down the war debt and finance the British Army's presence in the Americas. It was the first internal tax levied on the American colonists by Parliament and was met with strong resistance. Okay, so we gotta kind of break a little more of these pieces down as far as who is doing what. So you see with these on the right here, kind of break it down more so that you have the British North America. So what they're calling that aspect of it being basically like co-opted and occupied by the British, or shout out to Dr. Kia Pruitt, brutish Moors. Because we know who King George really is, King George II, and all this black nobility. We've gone over that information. So when you start seeing that these colonies are working on behalf of the British Crown, then you start seeing these peace agreements that they have in regards to how to keep navigating and keep on moving as far as in the direction of the doctrine of discovery on these lands between North and South America, or what we know as North and South America. So then you have the Treaty of Paris, which is a agreement between France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic in regards to colonization. And then you have a treaty right here defined in regards to the Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, which is not only a law, but also a contract between two nations and must, if possible, be construed as to give full force and effect to all its parts. So it's giving you what we would call both sides of the coin, right? The law aspect, or according to them, the legalities, and then they also give you the finance or the commercial aspect right here, telling you that this also can be a contract. A treaty is a contract. Now, obviously, for them, it had a lot to do with finance, because everything that we see right here had to do with debt, and then they made a treaty of Paris in regards to how to move forward with their excursions over here about that shit. So this kind of just goes over the peoples that were already here, and then their interactions with one of the main character that comes into play, and how, you know, he ends up being almost the star of the show, Lewis Cass. So you get to see how Royal Oak gets his so-called name here. In 1819, it was a surveying expedition by said then territorial governor Lewis Cass. Stated that a large oak tree at this small settlement reminded Cass of the story of the Royal Oak, where King Charles II of England, Scotland, and Ireland had to escape capture by the Roundheads after the Battle of Worcester. So he chose that name for the settlement. So you already see where his allegiance lies, if he's denoting something over here after the British Crown, because we already went over just where, how, and the importance of their role in colonization. So then we move on here. It's a book that comes out, and Michigan State puts it out as far as the different trees in Michigan, but this is right here in the beginning of the book. It states that Michigan occupies. So right there is telling you, if you know what they mean by Michigan, as the state of Michigan, as the corporate entity, the interim entity that occupies or overlays the actual land, says Michigan occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires, Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In respect to the Anishinaabe, we have included the Anishinaabe names of the trees where available. We encourage you to learn more about the Michigan tribal nations and indigenous cultures by connecting with Native American / indigenous peoples in your area. And they tell you about how to navigate as far as seeking information about federally recognized tribes. So you get more information on how the French colonists ended up degrading their traditional name. More information in regards to the federally recognizing or recognition of these tribes. We're going to get more in depth on Lewis Cass. Secretary of War under Andrew Jackson, represented Michigan in the United States Senate, also was a U.S. minister to France. Central figure in implementing the so-called Indian removal policy for Jackson's administration. Royal Oak was named in 1819 during one of the surveying expeditions led by Cass during his territorial governor role. What is a territorial governor? Territorial governors were appointed for 3-year terms. They were authorized to veto territorial legislation, appoint lower level officials, and serve as commander-in-chief of the militia. So then we're going to go ahead and go over this a little bit more. These kind of key things that Lewis Cass was involved in. He established a legal practice in Zanesville, Ohio. After serving in the Ohio House, Cass was also appointed as a U.S. Marshal. He also joined the Freemasons. He founded the Grand Lodge of Michigan. He fought in the Battle of Thames, appointed to govern Michigan Territory in 1813 to negotiate treaties with so-called Native Americans to open land for settlement, leading to a so-called surveying expedition. So 1813, remember we talked about 1791, 1793, those key points where the precedent was set as far as so-called ceding of lands with so-called elected tribal leaders to negotiate land. So then here you see that's who Lewis Cass was going to negotiate so-called treaties with. So then you see here in the middle, we're going to get into a little bit of the ideologies that were heavy as far as Lewis Cass was perpetuating. So he's very, very into what we call debt servitude, or know as debt servitude. People call it slavery. But definitely one of the things that Lewis Cass was really trying to keep implemented, something in regards to the term known as popular sovereignty in connection with slavery in the territories. It was first used by presidential candidate and Michigan Senator Lewis Cass in his 1847 Nicholson letter. Today, it is more closely associated with Douglas, and its connection to the failed attempt to accommodate slavery gave the term its present pejorative connotation. So you're starting to see here, it's a real interesting situation in regards to the idea that Lewis Cass was trying to keep going and who he was working on behalf of. Because remember, Royal Oak was named after who he said? King Charles II? So he's telling you the allegiance. So we're going to keep going into the perpetuation of the ideas and the ideologies that Lewis Cass set place for different mechanisms to follow, right? It's not just Lewis Cass, but it's an active arm in the machine. So we have the feelings towards the task of removing the so-called Indians. And this is in source material stated, or rather called Removal of the Indians in North American Review, January 1830. Lewis Cass. Quote, many of them were carefully taught at our seminaries of education in the hope that principles of morality and habits of industry would be acquired, and that they might stimulate their countrymen by precept and example of to a better course of life. Missionary stations were established among various tribes where zealous and pious men devoted themselves with generous ardor to the task of instruction, as well as in agriculture and the mechanic arts, and in the principles of morality and religion. So really, the missionaries aren't from here. So how could they teach us anything as far as the mechanics to the land here, and or the agriculture to the land here? Because they're not from here. So how would they have any already preconceived notions on what to do with the land? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. Then the morality and religion is obviously something in regards to some submissive doctrine to be put in a position to have the stimulation of a precept and example to a so-called better course of life, as though life wasn't already fine here and we didn't have antiquity or antiquitous civilizations for eons before any sort of colonization started coming over the South and the North, what we call America. The Roman Catholic Church preceded the Protestant. The Roman Catholic Church preceded the Protestant in this labor of charity, and the Lettres et Infantes are monuments of her zeal and liberality. Unfortunately, they are monuments also of unsuccessful and unproductive efforts. What tribe has been civilized by all this expenditure of treasure, labor, and care? So literally, Lewis Cass lets you know the Roman Catholic Church tried this first. And at the point of 1830, he's giving you a very, very grave effort to tell you that it didn't work. They had trouble doing it. So where did they just throw the blankets and then we died at? And then that was it after that. That's how the story ends. Clearly, in 1830, that's not how the story ended. Indian removal was the United States government, the U.S. government policy of forced displacement of self-governing tribes of the so-called Native Americans from their ancestral homelands in the eastern United States to lands west of the Mississippi River, specifically designated to the so-called Indian Territory, roughly present-day Oklahoma. The so-called Indian Removal Act, the key law which authorized the removal of Native tribes, was signed by Andrew Jackson in 1830. Same year that North American Review came out. Although Jackson took a hard line on Indian removal, the law was enforced primarily during the Martin Van Buren administration. After the passage of the Indian Removal Act in 1830, approximately 60,000 members of the so-called Cherokee, because we know that's Aniawea, Muskogee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations, including thousands of their so-called black slaves, were forcibly removed from their ancestral homelands, with thousands of dying during the Trail of Tears. Just a little background on Lettres et Infantes. This is a document reprinted well into the 19th century and widely imitated, which was instrumental in determining how generations of educated Europeans saw the so-called New World and its peoples. So it's really, and that was 1780, 1783. So this is their guidebook to try to make sure that they don't see the indigenous peoples as the actual rightful, sovereign people of the land as the common phrases are being stated nowadays. Or rather, within the last 30 to 40 years, these topics I've been trying to get across. This is what they're talking about all the way back then. So many different pieces to the puzzle of their moves that are recorded that they had to put in place. But when you start peeling it back, it all falls apart very, very fast. It is not our intention to undertake a delineation of the Indian character. Quick pause to kind of break down what delineation is in this context, which is that of an action of describing or to portray something precisely. So Lewis Cass states that it is not in their intention to undertake a delineation of the Indian character or a proper describing or precise portrayal of the Indian character. We shall content ourselves with sketching such features as may serve to explain the difficulty which has been experienced in extending to them the benefit of our institutions and teaching them to appreciate their value in said institutions. So there has to be a level of psychosis to get the so-called Indians to see that they could be of assistance and of help to their so-called institutions, being of the Roman, English, Catholic type of nature, as opposed to the Aboriginal, indigenous systems or institutional types of things that we had going on. When we talk about appreciation of value, that is of the value of being the church's human resource. Because once again, we confirm that the state of Michigan, for example, being on the topic of it, is an occupying entity, corporation, chartered on behalf of, or was rather on behalf of the church. So it's all alluding to that very clearly. And then he goes into a little bit farther, more things that they were looking to eradicate as far as our nature is concerned, because it was directly opposite or opposing to the controlling aspect of Roman Catholic property law, which ends up being acted in the form of colonization, which is just a blanket term for all these different things that we're breaking down as far as the mechanisms to get to different places we're at today. Government is unknown among them. Certainly that government which prescribes general rules and or codes, ordinances, and or those sorts of things to be enforces or vindicates them. The utter nakedness of their society can be known only by personal observation. The tribes seem to be held together by a kind of family ligament, by the ties of blood, which in the infancy of society are stronger as associations are weaker. As other associations are weaker. They have no criminal code, no courts, no officers, no punishments. They have no relative duties to enforce, no debts to collect, no property to restore. They are in a state of nature as much so as it is possible for any people to be. Injuries are redressed by revenge, and strength is a security for right. We see the above stating the distinction between the Aboriginal indigenous beings and their way of life prior to those missionaries making way to the old world with their military doctrine known as Christianity. Bear in mind, this caste technical high school formed the same function as the so-called Indian boarding schools by way of the inaccurate perpetuation of the so-called Indian character. The now black and African American focused caste tech is the well-groomed child of the aforementioned ideologies and plans of Lewis Cass and Company. So then you have a little flyer here. It's a 1923 dedication to Cass Tech and one of the earlier renditions of the building, Cass Tech. So we're going to kind of lure ourselves into more of the other side to kind of get into the information as far as the number play and the different ways that veneration was put in these mechanisms to perpetuate the ideas and the psychosis and the identity theft of those indigenous peoples, and how it ties to Royal Oak and Lewis Cass, and then whom we mentioned earlier briefly, Big Sean. So on Saturday, November 5th, 2022, I got a very, very strong feeling to go walk around downtown Royal Oak. Prior to this, the Lewis Cass dynamic was interesting. I was already rolling around certain pieces of information in my head as far as like Lewis Cass was the first person, whoop-de-whoop or whatever, to come around and see Royal Oak and then name it, and I was just rolling around certain information. But the numerology and the gematria connection begins at this direct moment. So once I remembered, I took a picture of this very, very interesting statue. Very, very interesting statue. A whole nother decode in and of itself. I flipped the date into the gematria, and it got me 133 in the reverse ordinal. And then Lewis Cass gave me 133 also in the reverse ordinal. So just a brief breakdown of gematria, Kabbalistic practice. What we know it as now as a tool is to decode a lot of what was used by what we know as the Jesuit order. Different secret societies, they use this as a practice to code different movements that they made, and it's a way of coding letters into numbers. So the English alphabet, A would equal 1, Z would equal 26, then in reverse, Z is 1, and then A is 26, and then in the reductions, you do numerology. So if it's a double digit number, you reduce it to its single digit, and then you continue to add on like that. That's how gematria gets down. But the nefarious usage of it you can find really interesting connections and very interesting decodes. So we're going to go ahead and move on to see how Lewis Cass, Big Sean, Royal Oak, and Cass Tech connect all the way by the numbers, yo. So we got Cass Tech, of course. Breaking it down just kind of a little bit further, you see it was opened in 1907. The original Cass Tech High School, commonly referred to, or Cass Technical High School, commonly referred to as Cass Tech, was located on or at 2501 2nd Avenue in Detroit. Named in honor of Lewis Cass, the school was located at the top floor of an old Cass Union School, a 3-story brick building built in 1861 on a farm donated by Lewis Cass. If we got any information on Freemasonry and the significance of the top floor, it's a picture of the ladder going up to the top. And it's always about getting to the top of that as far as the next level to the degree. And you want to get them as far as how they are concerned, these Freemasons. The Scottish Rite, 33rd degree, is the pinnacle. And it's always about what they mention as far as brick masonry. So they're giving you a lot of information here straight out the gate. But where it starts to connect that is, first off, 2501 2nd Avenue gives you 69 in reverse reduction. Sean Anderson gives you 69 in reverse reduction. Grand Master also gives you 69 in reverse reduction. So off the top, from this particular angle, we're starting to see uncanny just... We're just going to go ahead and keep on moving. Because now we're going to just see, Big Sean, that's where he went to high school. That's kind of, what does that really mean? Well, if he ends up being the main one that picks to be the rapper for the city, and that just so happens to be the city of the high school, there's got to be more connections. So Finally Famous, first mixtape, came out June 28th, 2011. June 28th, 2011, in reverse English ordinal gives us 90. Exeter, New Hampshire, which is where Lewis Cass was born, in reverse reduction also gives us a 90. Marvin and Chardonnay, the number one single from Finally Famous, gives us a reverse reduction 90 also. Battle of Fames, the war in which Cass was a territorial governor for the army, promoted to brigadier general. Battle of Fames also comes out to reverse reduction 90. So there's a connections of some sort of veneration, it seems, right? Some sort of allegiance, but let's keep going. We're gonna keep going through the career of Big Sean to see if there's any more of these that we can find. So we got My Last, which was also another song off of that initial album. 90 in English ordinal, 72 in the reverse. Cass Technical High School, 72 in English ordinal reduction. Battle of Thames, reverse 90. And it goes again with the My Last 90. March 1st, 2011 is when My Last came out. 48 in English ordinal. Sean Anderson gives us a 48 in the English ordinal reverse. Or the English ordinal reduction, I'm sorry. So we're sorry, these numbers is flipping. Excuse me, I forgot to say the 72 also for My Last and Cass Technical High School. Next album, Hall of Fame, released August 27th, 2013. August 27th, 2013 gives us a 70. Grand Lodge of Ohio in reverse reduction also gives us a 70. The significance of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, Cass was one of the founders of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, representing the Lodge of Amity at the first meeting on January 4th, 1808. Worshipful Master, 79. That's one of the degrees that Cass had to obtain before becoming one of the founders of the Grand Lodge of Ohio. Hall of Fame also gives us 79. Dark Sky Paradise, released February 24th, 2015. February 24th, 2015 gives us a 128. September 11th, 1922. The significance of this, however, would be the completion of the construction of the newest building of Cass Tech, and that wasn't completed until September 11th, 1922. But that also has the English ordinal of 128. Lewis Cass and Albert Kahn, the architect, designer of the new Cass Tech building, both have reductions in the reverse of 61. We're gonna go on to the next album because at this point it's looking real interesting on the allegiance. We're gonna keep it moving. Alright, Play No Games, which came off of their album Dark Sky Paradise, the pivotal single off of that, also to this day arguably like one of the better Big Sean songs, right? That has a 128 in the English ordinal. The Lewis Cass Legacy Society has a reverse reduction of 128. Now, this is how we can link the perpetuation of Lewis Cass's ideas, the ideology of the misnomer, the perpetuation of the subjugation, and the not knowing of whom the people really are. So we see the clear veneration to the Lewis Cass Legacy Society within the title of the name. But then, to get another angle, why did Big Sean pick to do, or why was rather the artistic direction of the music video for Martin? What does Martin represent? Also from Detroit. The show, also in Detroit. Martin is a 42 in reverse reduction, and so is the so-called N-word. Gives you a 42. And then you got Big Sean in the video reenacting as though he is Martin. So it just goes to show you another angle into how they reinforce by the code, by the numbers, the different psychological operations to keep you from knowing exactly who you are and what stake you have on this land. I decided February 3rd, 2017. That date gives us a reverse in 133. Lewis Cass gives us a direct reverse in 133. And also, February 3rd, 2017 gives us a 61 in reverse reduction. Lewis Cass gives us also a 61 in reverse reduction. Cass Union School also gives us a 61. You see here with the different posing that Big Sean is doing, very, very reminiscent of that other Freemasonic pose that is depicted right next there. Then we have some dates and the numbers flipping out for more veneration. Big Sean releases new I Decided album trailer. This article was posted February 2nd, 2017. Mind you, the album came out February 3rd, 2017. February 2nd, 2017. The reverse reduction of that is 69. Remember, the original address of the original Cass Tech building, 2501 2nd Avenue. Reverse reduction is at 69. I Decided gives you 47 in reverse reduction. The Cabal also gives you 47 in reverse reduction. And then you also have the 47 degrees on their depiction of the Masonic compass in regards to them, and then the various usages of it. Freemasonic compass to draw a distinction between our indigenous Masonic practices. Hence, you can see many of ancient buildings and mounds and different things that are built by the mound builders that knew these ancient sciences, but just weren't in the game of using them for nefarious means to control the masses. Detroit 2, released September 4th, 2020. September 4th, 2020 gives us a 111 in English ordinal and a 58 in the reverse reduction. We also get for January 3rd, 1810, 58 in the reverse reduction. But the significance of that date, January 3rd, 1810, is when Cass Tech was elected Grand Master for the Grand Lodge of Ohio. More veneration. Then you have the 177 link right here, coming with the Grand Master. And then you get the Jesuit order with 177 once again. Then you get the 111 sinking in with the mark of the beast, because that's the date in which the album came out. And then you also get the Pope's veneration with the 111 as well, with the release date. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Double or Nothing with Metro Boomin. Release date December. This is wild, bro. December 8th, 2017. Release date. You have a 73 and a 55. And the reduction. Once again, the original Cass Tech address 2501 2nd Avenue gives you the reduction of 55. More veneration. 69 in reverse reduction. You have the key single Go Legend 69. Sean Michael Leonard Anderson. Reverse reduction 147. The reverse of Go Legend 147. Zanesville, Ohio. Or Zanesville rather, 145. Boominati, reverse of that, 145. Reduction of Boominati 44. Zanesville 44. Zanesville, Ohio 73. December 8th, 2017, the release date. 73. 145 for Zanesville also. Also for Boominati. Oh my goodness. Last but not least, I'm getting stressed out. It's just fucking wild. It's just like so many ways to connive people to think like, yo, it's just nothing going on, but everything is happening. So many different ways to go about the information. So many different points of references. So you have LeBron James previewing Big Sean and Metro Boomin's All or Nothing album on December 7th, 2017. Which gives us a 72 in the English ordinal, which the reduction of that is also Cass Technical High School. Of course, they had to tag in LeBron James because LeBron James is also 42. We went over what that number means. 42 also has to do with Tuskegee, interestingly enough. But we have the knockings once again of the 177. So December 6, 2017. Once again, 2 days before December 8th, the release date of Double or Nothing. You get this article stating that this is where LeBron gives an early listen to the album. He's a die-hard hip-hop head. He's also a basketball savant, Because of his majestic abilities on the court and his superstar status, King James has always received the royal treatment, especially from rappers. So December 6th gives you a 177 that knocks us back to the Jesuit order. So they had to tap in LeBron James so he can play that part, make sure they get their veneration as well. After playing Big Sean's and Metro Boomin's first single, Pull Up and Wreck, James dived deep into the album and played unreleased cuts. One clip caption, "Sure feels good to be black in the back. Double entendre." Finds Sean gloating about his success as an African American. So clearly here ties it all together in a nice bow wrapped up for you. We get Pull Up and Wreck with the 55, December 8th, 2017, the release date 55 also. And then you get the 177s once again for the Jesuit order, letting you know what's going on. It's just absurdities, yo. Just pure blown absurdities. Because once again, to tie it all up in a nice big bow, you get the veneration within the different albums and the different release dates and musical plays that all go back to not necessarily Louis Cass as an individual, but a representative of a greater movement that was known to be what we blanketly call colonization. But to look further into it, you can see that it bleeds even as far as the idea of what you should be known and regarded to and respected as and looked at as a so-called African American, to be black in the back. This is what the different angles of that perpetuation can look like if one makes the different moves to see the different angles that are taken, because it's absolutely astronomical. It's very strategic. It's always been an active arms of war, but we've always fought it to the point of now in which we can do what we're doing, signifying the victory.